beforehand. Yeah, thanks a lot for tuning in, and apologies for being sick last week. Bit better this week, still not 100%. So apologies for being nasally, but I was on a map session the other week and I was talking to someone and they asked me, you know, I've been searching the internet, Nathan, and I haven't been able to see, you know, where you talk about risk. And this is someone that's risk adverse, someone starting out, and it made me think, you know, everybody's in a different position in their portfolio. Everyone's, you know, on a different race, and you know, some people are more risk adverse, some people aren't. And I thought it'd be good to, you know, dive into risk and how to assess risk. Probably half of what I do on a day-to-day basis is just minimizing risk and trying to sort of stop hurdles before they become a hurdle, and you know, planning, you know, so things don't blow my fingers off on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, looking at it, it's very, very important to plan and minimize that risk. And tonight I've got a slide deck here of 30 slides, and I may be very optimistic in trying to get through all of these, but let's jump straight into it. So some of the things that I want to talk about, obviously on the screen here, tonight's agenda. Looking at different stages of your life, different positions, different strategies, things that, you know, can go wrong at different times. So I guess understanding risk, you know, some people are more risk adverse than others. Some people are very analytical, and you want to make sure that, you know, you're very aware of risk, you manage your risk really well, but at the same time, you don't go into analyst paralysis where, you know, you overanalyze things as well. So probably the biggest risk for me starting out as an investor was, you know, having to work for 40 years and, you know, sacrifice my life just to get by, just to pay for food and put a roof over my head and all that sort of stuff. So I think, you know, one of the biggest risks that we all have is, you know, being born into slavery and selling 40 years of our life, you know, just to get by. So I think, you know, minimizing that risk, as I said a moment ago, like just minimizing risk wherever you can, trying to, you know, take away things that could hurt you is really important. But, you know, identifying it. A lot of people going, it's like a kid, you know, running across the road and you don't look left, don't look right. You don't understand that, you know, a car may come. You're not looking out for these sort of things, and being aware of it's really important. So Luke just wrote here, biggest risk is doing nothing and daydreaming through life. So it can be a big risk, and I see people that take action but they have no planning and they have no strategy and they don't have clarity, and they're taking massive risks. So if we look at, you know, some of the things that I want to talk about this evening, I want to talk about debt, I want to talk about property, I want to talk about, you know, parts of your life where, you know, more debt's better, less debt's better, etc. Debt can be your friend, but also debt can be your worst enemy. And I see a lot of people that are most fearful. The biggest fear that I see on a day-to-day basis, probably people that are sort of scared of debt or having too much debt or how to pay off the debt or, you know, that sort of stuff. I love debt. That's why, you know, I'm very adverse to it and happy with it. And yeah, just in, you know, looking at risk, as I said beforehand, like the 40 years of slavery, I think that, you know, for a lot of people, and that's what I saw out of 2020, is that, you know, having one income stream is a big risk, because, you know, people can get sick. That's the first thing. People can't always work every day, day in, day out, week in, week out, forever. However, having one income stream that could easily be removed from you. A lot of people think, oh, I'll go get a job, I'll be a good employee, whatever the case may be. But, you know, I know a lot of pilots out there, even though I don't fly, I know a lot of people that are on airlines and whatnot, which still have no job and have to go reskill themselves, etc. So having multiple streams of income will minimize risk as well. So that's the biggest part about what I look at on a day-to-day basis. And one of the other things as well, where I think a lot of people could do, you know, take more sort of improvement on a day-to-day basis, is there, you know, emotional sort of intelligence. Everyone's talking about the intellectual intelligence, but I think a lot of the time people's emotional intelligence will either, add, it always adds risk. Whenever you add any emotion into anything, it always adds risk, good, bad, it's all risk. And understanding your emotions, whether they're over optimistic emotions, whether they're pessimistic emotions, whether they're too analytical, not analytical enough, managing your emotions and holding them is important as well to help minimize risk. So how can you overcome risk? I think having strategy is really important, having clarity. Every year, I've talked a lot about goals. We did the webinar a couple of months ago about goals and planning and strategy, how to build a property portfolio and whatnot. I think planning is crucial to minimize risk, because if on a day-to-day basis I can identify risk, I can go, okay, this thing here sounds too much hard work, or it sets off a lot of issues here. Just a random one, I was getting my hair cut. A lot of people are commenting because I left a little bit of hair on the back. When I was getting my hair cut, my hairdresser, he's a lovely guy, and we're talking about crypto, and he's like, oh, why don't you sell your crypto? I'm like, man, no, right? And people always have their opinion. People are like, if I had crypto, I'd be selling it, right? And it's like, cool, you could, but what about the tax implications? What about what are you going to do with the cash once it's in your bank account? People look at one little element of the transaction, but they don't look at every aspect. So yes, look at selling something, and that's great, but then what is going to be the reaction to that? So every action will have a reaction, and without having clarity and looking at every single vantage point, there's so much risk that gets involved. So if you're thinking of buying a property, there's risk. How can you minimize that risk? What are the opportunity costs that come around that? And we're going to talk about that tonight as well. What is the risk associated by doing that action? What's the risk associated from not doing that action? If you're going to sell a property, what is the risk associated from all those angles? How can you sort of identify them and overcome it? If you have clarity, you can say, well, this is going to help me get closer to where I'm heading to, or this is going to get me further away. Quite often when I sort of see people's positions on a day-to-day basis, when I do map sessions and speak with my investors, I can quite often tell very early on where something has gone from just looking at a sheet full of numbers and their positions of what properties they've got, the time of accumulating those properties, what the income looks like. I can sort of tell whether it comes from an advice issue, where someone's had some screwed up advice, whether it comes from them being too fearful or being too conservative, whether it comes from people that have got a big pile of mess on paper. It all comes back to planning and strategy. So having clarity is really, really important. So, and we've all got sort of, just going on from that, what an icon to have. We've got no mute, we're mute, we can't hear Nathan. But I see people on a day-to-day basis, basis that have, a bad advice from their accountant, or they've got bad advice from their financial planner, or their super fund is completely screwed up, or their loan structure is totally screwed up, or they've bought some property that's a buzz at the time. So I see people which, back in the past, there was these scammy properties, right? There's things called NDIS, not NDIS, there's something now, NRAS, right? So back in the Kevin 07 era, there was these things called NRAS, where you take a lower rent and you get a tax benefit. However, with those properties, people had to buy new properties, and they were getting, they were paying overpriced and stuff like that. I'm buying properties that were NRAS going back 10 years ago. They were selling for 300, 350. I'm picking them up for 200 or 180 for a 10-year-old property. There's people out there beforehand spruiking granny flats and off the plan properties, and olive farms and emu farms, and I see a lot of my investors that come from the medical field that get affected very very much so. It's like there's like a big scam going on with a lot of people in the medical field, where they're constantly getting hit up from these financial advisors and gurus and experts, which are coming in and basically selling them sort of dog shit products. So just be aware of people that are trying to sell you something. Wonder, how are they getting paid? What is that going to do? What is their advice, and how is that going to help me? Nowadays, like I talked about those NRAS and the holiday type of timeshare type of properties. There's a lot of them that went through the 1990s and the early 2000s, and a lot of them have disappeared, those scammers, because internet gives availability of information. You have information at your fingertips, so if you're unsure of something, go and research it, look into it a bit further. But nowadays there's a lot of them, and I might get people, drop it off when I say this, because a lot of people are excited by these things, but there's a thing called NDIS. I did mention it accidentally before, but NDIS, I think that's an area which is getting a lot of attention, which is pumped up, hype, which adds risk. The dual key properties out there's a lot of people out there spruiking off the plan, sort of properties that are dual key. You get a house and a granny flat and they're attached, and you get two incomes. The risk is still very much attached to those properties, and I'll go into that further when I go into properties later. So I'm going to start the first half of this and talking about strategies, things that people can get hurt on and burnt on. If you've got questions, like, ask me along the way, but I'll get into the property aspect of it a little bit later. So constantly you'll see properties out there in the market which people paid 20%, 30% more for, going back 10 years, 20 years ago, 10 years, 15 years ago, and it's like, you guys have wasted 10 years of your life and you're still selling something for less than what you paid back then. So make sure you're getting the right advice on that front. So as I said, at each step of your life, you will, require different needs. I think this photo really says it well. You've got younger people, some business people, and some older people. As you go through those different phases of your life, you will have different needs and different, positions. So we'll go and jump in and explore some of that. Just remembering that none of this is financial advice, and if you do have some specific financial advice, you'll need to go and speak to someone that is qualified on that, and I'm not your guy. However, if we're just mates down at the pub, I can talk to you about what we're talking about tonight. So looking at each step, whether you be the young person or the older person, you'll need different requirements. You're just starting out here, so you may have high cash flow earning capacity. You just finished uni or whatever, getting a job, you've got 40 years worth of debt that you can pay off, where at the other side, you don't have any cash flow coming through at that point. At this point, you've got no capital because you're just starting out. At this point, you might have a lot of equity, you have a nest egg that so it's different at each point. And making sure that you're structured well throughout this. So yeah, I think starting out, someone in their 20s is very different to someone in their 40s. So if you're a 20-year-old, you're probably getting started with your first property or your first 5 properties. A lot of people will jump straight in and want to go and buy their big dream home, and I think that's where the big trap is for a lot of young people, is that they have the thought that they want to go and get a nice new property, or a 4-bedroom house with a 2-car garage, or whatever the case may be. As a 20-year-old, you need to understand that you're not this house that you're buying, or the unit that you're buying, or the property that you're buying, isn't the property that's going to take you through to retirement. So realize that if you are younger, that you're not, or if you've got children that are thinking about buying the first property, whatever, realize that it's not your dream home. It's okay. You can buy a shit property, and it's just a vehicle to get you from where you are today to sort of where you want to be in the future. If you At 20, you have the ability to be more aggressive. If you're 40, then you have 20 less years worth of income potential ahead of you than the 20-year-old would. So the mistakes that you make or things that could hurt you, you have less time to recover, and you might have family, you might have children, or whatever the case may be. So if you're just starting out, you might be buying your first home. Older, you might be buying a second home or a family home or whatever the case might be. So need to work out where the risk lies and where that fits in on the spectrum. So someone without kids, in the strategy, you might be 25 years old buying some property. Right? What's the end goal? You want to be retired? Cool. When are you going to be retired? Is there 2 people earning an income? Will you be having children in 5 years' time? Are you going to be getting married in a couple of years' time? Or whatever the case may be, you need to be working out, when will we be having those children? Will your situation be like after you have the children? Will a spouse return to work? Will you have 2 incomes? So if you have got a family and you've got if you've got 2 incomes today and you don't have kids, and then you've got 2 incomes turned to 1, and then suddenly you've got a spouse plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids that you've got to look after, the risk shifts, because if something happens to your income, then you're the only breadwinner. So you need to sort of plan for that in the future, and how to structure your debt. So I see a lot of people that don't think about it too much at the start. They might go have some kids, and then they'll come back and they'll be like, I want to do some properties. And it's like, well, the income positions now drop significantly. You've got more on the expenses column. The bank isn't going to be looking at you. So, so it's important to plan that. Like if you, I've done these on different scenarios, which are typical that I see. Some with kids out, some without kids, sorry, some with kids. So if someone's got kids, your position's a bit different. You want to make sure that you've got some sort of buffer there. You want to make sure that you have clarity in your position, because you've got more than just yourself to think about, etc. But at the same time, you want to make sure that these kids look like they're, I don't know, teenagers. Are your kids 2 years old? Are they 10-year-old? Are they 20-year-old? If you've got a kid that's 16 years old, 2 years later, the kid's going to be off your balance sheet, and the bank's going to be more favourable for lending to you. If you've got 4 kids that are 5 years old or 3 years old each, then obviously the bank's going to look at you in a different light. And what are you planning for? So do you need a bigger house with those younger kids that you want to have them in, or do you need a smaller house and you're thinking, these kids are going to move out in the next 5, 10, 15 years or whatever? Maybe not 15, it's too far. 5 or 10 years. Do I need to, are we going to be downsizing? Do we not have that house where we're going to move into? Are we not, you might be sitting in your house thinking to yourself at the moment, the house isn't big enough for us, right? It's like, well, it might be not big enough today. You might have 4 cars in your driveway, but those kids might move later. You buy a bigger house, and then suddenly you're going to have all the space you don't need. Maybe skip that phase and go, okay, well, when the kids move out, if we weren't, looking after the kids here, would move to the coast, would move to the bush, would move to here, would move to there, would have an apartment right on the water, and you may be able to plan for that next step and miss out that middle step. So, you want to be thinking about your income levels and sort of trying to minimise the risk on that front. Will the income be going up? Will the spouse be going back to work? When will we get back to 2 incomes? How long can we stay for 2 incomes, without 2 incomes to 1 income? Going back 20 years ago, it was normal to have a 1 income family. Going back 30 years ago, it was normal to have a 1 income family. In 2021, everybody thinks they're richer. All their asset prices have gone up. Everything's inflated away. However, people are more and more trapped and enslaved, where you have to have both people go to work in 95% of the scenario out there. So, the things that you need to factor in as to what you'll be buying, because the person over here, would be at a really different mindset to the person on this scale. Thinking of, for tax advantages, whose name would the property be under? So if you're a single 20-year-old or a family 30, 40-year-old, if you have one income worker that's got high income, one with a smaller income, naturally you'd want to try and put the higher cash flow under the lower income earner. So if you've got two people today, let's call them boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wife in the future, and you're planning for the kids, it would be really stupid to go, okay, and I'm just being really, a scenario here, generalizing, so no one shoot me for being, whatever the word would be for rude for saying this, but let's say you've got mum and dad, mum stays home, looks after the kids, she's not earning an income, but dad's out earning an income. It'd be stupid to put negative gear properties or properties that have got heaps of depreciation and tax benefits under the mum's name, whilst the dad is at work paying all this tax, and then he has the high cash flow properties under his name. So you'd want to plan for the future. For me today, planning for the future, it's not about me today. It's not like, oh, I know I'll be okay throughout life. I don't need to do stuff. But I'm thinking about the next generation. I'm thinking about the generation after that. Actually, saw a book that I bought years ago. I forget what it was called. I picked it up the other day, and I don't read books. I've read maybe like 3 or 4 books in my life, but I bought this book for me and a couple of mates. And I think it's something like Family Wealth, and it's about building intergenerational wealth for different, different generations. And that's what I'm thinking about today is, I'm thinking like 50 years, 100 years after I'm gone, not even while I'm still alive. So hopefully it's another 100 years away that I'm thinking for. And, what are you thinking for? You're thinking, when you're buying a property today, it's exciting. You might be buying your first property today, but you've got to be thinking about, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, how is this property going to play its role in the longer term? Because property is not a short game. Like, you're playing the long game. Are you playing the long enough game, or are you just thinking too short term? And a lot of people out there do just think too short term without looking at the long game. So another generalized sort of situation here that we would have is someone with a job. Someone with a job, it would be easy to get a loan. Someone in a job, just rock up, give them your pay slips. The bank goes, yep, you're earning the income. We can see it coming in. We'll give you a loan. If you're in business, we'll get to that, which is self-employed shortly. It's a whole different ball game. You need to think about it and plan 5 years ahead. Right? Are you always going to be in a job? If you're not going to be in a job, what are you going to be doing? Are you going to be consulting? Are you going to be a contractor? I see so many people. I remember this very clearly. One of my very good clients from early days, they were on, I don't know, I'm just making a story up here, roughly numbers. Client was on, let's call it 150 grand a year. This was in like 2010. And he came in and he said, oh, it's going to be so great. My income's gone up. It's gone up from 150 to 200. This guy's been in his job for 20 years. And then I was like, okay, how did you get extra 50 grand? And he goes, well, you see, I went from being a PAYG to being a contractor. And I looked at him and I was like, no, you didn't, right? You just, shot yourself in the leg. You fucked up now. The reason being is that when he went from a PAYG job into becoming a contractor, he didn't look at how the bank would see him. So we need to look at every move we make. If we take an action, what's going to be the reaction? If we buy something that's going to give us heaps of money, we're going to naturally get a lot of money coming in. If we're going to buy something that's going to take money, then we're naturally going to lose money. Everything has a reaction. I put my hand in this cup of water, the water goes up, right? It's natural, it happens, right? The water finds its own level. I don't know why, I need to drink it still. But if everything has a reaction, so you need to think about, if I take this action, what will the bank think? If I take this action, what could happen to my position? If I don't take this action, what will happen? It's like driving a car. Turn the blinker too fast, good. Turn the blinker too slow, not so good. You need to be planning for this stuff. So will you always have that job? Will you have, in your job or in your career, will you have more or less income in the future? Because that would determine what sort of properties you may or may not need in your portfolio. If you're going into retirement, would it be better to go buy negative geared properties in your retirement? No. Would it be good to go and buy a non-income producing property in your retirement years? No, because you need income going into retirement. So there are things that you need to factor in to try and minimise that risk along the way. Have a little bit of water. If you've got questions, shoot them through. If you're self-employed, you need to consider a lot more, right? Predominantly around good question, Tracy. I'll come back to you in a moment on that. Someone that's self-employed versus someone that's got a job, like the bank would generally look at someone that's got a job. Crazy, I know, but they look at them as less risks than someone that's self-employed. So Tracy just said, we've never found it was easier to get loans than our employees. So yeah, it's something that the banks, you need to plan for this. Your tax return, so many people that are self-employed that love to do business with me, that love to buy properties, and sometimes it takes 2 years for someone to come on board at B.Invested because they haven't planned it well. They're just like, I've got a business, I don't want to pay tax, and naturally, like, no one loves getting robbed from the government and from the community that they're in. So people want to try to minimise their tax. And sometimes people will claim too much deductions in their business. So they might make 200 grand and they claim everything as deductions. They end up earning 30 grand or 40 grand a year. And then the bank says, well, now you are on the bread line. You don't meet the commitments. We're not going to give you a loan. So, you have the opportunity to control your income from the amount that you earn. Make sure that you don't claim too much. Make sure that you do have enough income coming through. Make sure that you are sort of making enough as well. Make sure that your business is structured right. Last night I did a Facebook Live with Ridwan Hannon from One Path Accountants. Make sure that you've got a good accountant that's structuring your business. I see people in business which have screwed themselves up. I've seen people that have got themselves in a massive financial problem from being in business. Make sure that you've got a solid business plan. I treat my property investing like a business, and I want to make sure that I've got a clear strategy on that. So yeah, also when starting out a business, you can't sort of get lending in the first year. Most banks want to see 2 years worth of lending before they will give you a loan. So if you are thinking of starting a business, how can you transition to that? Can you set up a company today and can you start doing a little bit of consulting work, which will build a little bit of cash flow, a little bit of revenue for the first year, and then for the second year, can you ramp that up a little bit more and make a nice easy transition from PAYG in a job over to self-employed, so you can not be out of the game for all that much sort of time frame. So I see so many people that come in on a day-to-day basis that want to build a business. I see people that are in good businesses, people that have got lots of money coming from their businesses and all that sort of stuff. And I've also seen a lot of people that come in and I'm like, you're probably better off in a job. Don't do your business, go get a job. Not that that's any advice to them, but I do sit there and say, you're probably better off if you had a job, you would be able to do more. So just a thing to factor in. Some people have two incomes, so whether you have a spouse or whether you do have two jobs. I know this picture here shows two people, but some people will have two jobs. One person, two jobs. I have a mate and he was working two full-time jobs. I used to work two full-time jobs. You might have two people with two full-time jobs. So then be questioning yourself, like, will you always have those two incomes? Will you be moving down to one income at some point? You want to be purchasing in accordance with 5 years' time. You don't want to be purchasing in line with today and all that sort of stuff. You need to be looking at the future so you can sort of navigate yourself towards the life where you want to be, not just making a deal based on today's position. So if you do have two incomes, obviously naturally two incomes being greater level of cash flow, you've got lower levels of risk, because if you lose one job, you still got one job, etc. So if you do have two incomes, so that could be the person that's in the middle there somewhere. If you do have two jobs, someone may be losing their job for a period of time. You need to plan and try to minimise that risk along that way. If someone has one income, the question always asked is, can you get a second income? And it's not necessarily an income via, let's go get a second job. It could be, are you earning enough income from your job? Could you be doing something else? Are you on 40 grand, you could be getting 80 grand. Are you getting 80 grand, you could be getting 120 grand. Whatever the case may be, is there something you could be doing which is going to be higher cash flow so you can be able to service to get the loans from the bank? What other sort of risks do you have? Like, can you get that second? Can you go from one income to a second income? Could you build a side business? Could you do an online business? Could you do Amazon? I don't know. I've never been in Amazon. I actually never bought anything off Amazon. I wouldn't know how to navigate through the site. I don't even know how it works, but I do know that people run Amazon businesses. People used to run eBay business. People go and pick up secondhand things and they go and redo them and sell them, or whatever the case may be. They may be flipping things. So what can you do if you've got one income? How can you create multiple streams of income? For me, building multiple streams of income, property has been my favorite go-to to build multiple streams of income. Even if it's 50 bucks a week, I used to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day, then I went to 2 packs of cigarettes a day. If I'm making 50 bucks a week, then I need 7 properties to buy me 7 days worth of smokes. How are you building your lifestyle out? For me, it was property. I've got property, I've got business, I've got other financial instruments. Do you just have one income stream, or do you have 7 income streams? How can you build that position out? One thing that I'm actually going to make a video on this separate to this in the short term, like I'm going to put it out shortly. I think maybe Friday we'll record. Most people are getting paid weekly or fortnightly or monthly, right? But the problem is that you are eating daily, right? You are spending money on a daily basis. So you really should have more income streams because you want to get paid daily. Who wants to get paid, weekly or fortnightly or monthly? You should be getting paid daily. So what can you do to build multiple income streams that will help you out from all aspects? I always ask people, what are your goals? If you're trying to build a portfolio, a lot of people come in with the mindset, I want to buy a property so I can buy 5 properties. So, okay, you want to buy 5 properties, but what are those properties actually going to do for you? People are like, I just want to have 5 properties. More importantly, what are you trying to do? If you have clarity around that sort of end position, you'd be like, I want to earn 2 grand a week, or I want to earn 100 grand a year. If you want to earn 100 grand a year, that's cool. You've got clarity. What are you doing in order to get closer to that? Are your habits healthy habits, or are they bad habits that are getting you further away from that goal? If you need 100 grand a year, that is $2,000 a week. That's your goal. How do you build yourself closer and closer to $2,000 per week? That's the question you need to be asking yourself. One of the biggest things, so I'm going to go from all different levels of our positions today. Not everyone is a investor or a homeowner at this point. So some of you may be looking to buy your first property. So, depending you're a first homeowner or experienced person, or you've got a few properties, whatever, how do you minimize risk as a first home buyer? First importantly, understand what are your goals. I see people all the time, whether it's a barbecue or something. I always try to be incognito. I don't want people to know. I don't want to talk about property. I don't want to talk about certain things, because when I do, I get on a tangent. So just if I'm out, I've been invited to some things on the weekend, like barbecues and stuff, and when I speak to people, Like people will be like, oh, I'm looking to buy a house. I've got $1 million to spend. I've got 900 grand to spend, etc. People will go to the broker, ask how much money they can borrow, and then they get told from the broker, oh, you can borrow 800 grand, let's call it. The broker will tell them you can borrow up to 800. The person will be like, okay, I want to go buy a property for 900 grand. It's like, fuck, you can borrow up to 800 grand, right? So why try and go over it, right? If you are buying a house to live in, just be really mindful of this. I get a lot of people on a day-to-day basis that say, should I buy a house to live in, or should I buy an investment property? I can't answer that question. I always tell everyone, do what feels right for you, right? If you're going to sleep better knowing that you have a mortgage to pay for the bricks that surround your bed, cool. If you don't care and you just look at it from a financial perspective, investing is probably better. So, work out what sits well with you. But the way I see it, if you're buying a house to live in, then you have to get up every day to pay that mortgage. Let's say you go and buy a house for $1 million, right? $1 million, and let's say you get an interest rate at 3% interest. There's $30,000 a year. You have to get up every day, day in, day out. You can't sit there and go, nah, I'm going to take a month off. I'm going to go on a holiday. I'm going to go driving. I'm going to do whatever. Recently, I just took a trip all the way through Queensland, and I'm like, I actually had the thought, I'm like, it's actually the first time in my life I actually felt like I want to be a perpetual traveller, right? And a perpetual traveller is just someone that just doesn't have a place of residence. I just want to travel. It'd be cool. Just go around Australia, right? And if you're stuck in a job, you wouldn't have that flexibility to. If you're stuck in a mortgage, you wouldn't have that flexibility to. So if you're buying a house to live in, just remember that you have to get up every day, go to that job or go to your business, perform a task, come home and live in your house of those bricks that you're buying. That's cool. Or if you bought, for the say at $1 million, you have to pay that 30 grand a year. If you went and bought, say, 5 properties for 200 grand a piece, you would have 5 tenants going to work every day to pay the rent, which would come into your account, and then you could pay the mortgage. So the $1 million for a house to live in, or 5 properties at 200 grand a piece, they're bringing $300 a week. You're getting $300 times 5. That's $1,500 a week, or $78,000 a year. Quick calculation in my head. 78 grand a year income to pay that mortgage of $30,000, or you have to get up and pay that mortgage. So just be mindful, right? It doesn't need to be $1 million mortgage for your first house. If you could live in a house or live in a unit for $200,000 or $300,000, you've got more disposable income, you've got more freedoms in life, you've got more choices. You always want to have more choices and more options. So for me, I bought my first property. I think I was at like 100 odd properties. I remember picking up these newspapers when I was moving house. I was like, wow, it's got on the front of the newspaper, it said the Donald Trump of Australia, before everyone sort of hated Trump. But I thought it was cool, and I thought to myself, I never owned a property beforehand, right? This is my first property, but the investment properties got me there. So what is the purpose of buying the property? If you're a first home buyer, do you have a plan? It's not your forever home. Whatever you're buying today is your first one. It's not going to be the end one. So it's okay to rent-vest. It's okay to have a 1-bedroom unit to live in that you own, rather than a 4-bedroom house that your mates want. Because if you're not going to do anything else, it's probably better to go buy the 4-bedroom place, right? If you're not going to do anything else, get the biggest house. But if you look at the opportunity cost, and I'm going to talk about the cost of opportunity and the opportunity risk shortly, you've got more options at that point. So yeah, as a first home buyer, I think it's important that for everybody, it's important to have a good team around you. A good team will help you minimize your risk. So make sure you've got a good accountant, a good lawyer, and a good broker. And if you want a good buyer's agent, that's where I can help out. I can help people on all those fronts. So I own a law firm, an accountancy practice, financial planning, all different sort of business that we got. But yeah, the role where I help people is as a buyer's agent, locating the properties that are cheap. So, there's different elements to manage risk. It doesn't just stop at buying the first property. It doesn't just stop at when you sign a contract on a property. There's lots of property risks that come in. So I want to get into how to manage the risk when buying a property. And I think I had a typo there. Managing risk with buying a dud. It should be managing a risk with not buying a dud. So when buying a property, you want to make sure that you don't get stuck with a lemon or something that's got lots of repairs, right? There's lots of things that risk is associated with buying a property. You can spend too much for the property. So quite often, probably 80 to 90% of the time when I'm buying properties for myself or for other people, we're buying them below the price that someone would have paid for it 10, 15 years ago, which gives me great comfort knowing that, if someone was silly enough to buy something or whatever, then someone else will come along and pay more money for it. So, I want to buy it below, most of the time below what someone else has paid for it. But on the flip side of that, someone has paid more for it. Actually just seen a comment as I'm saying this. I've seen a comment up there. I'll get to it shortly with the NRAS question. Keep the questions coming through, everyone. But if someone's paid more for that property, how do you make sure that you don't pay too much for it? So when buying a property, you want to look at, people always ask me, how do you know you're buying a property below market value? So there's three things when buying a property: below market value, upside for growth, strong cash flow. If it doesn't have one of them, scrap the deal. So how do you know that you're buying a property below market value? So I'm always looking at a few different things. So recent sales that have gone and sold. So then if you can look at comparables, if you've got 5 units in a complex that have just sold and you're buying one and those have sold for 300, you're picking one up for 250. Why are you picking up for 250? Is it the same configuration? If it is, well then you know that the greater market is paying for that sort of level. Recent sales and other properties currently on the market, so you can determine, are they all sold? I went to a place yesterday and I bought a motel that was off market, and I looked at this suburb and I was like, every single house has sold, and I'm like, I'm buying the motel for the house price. It's like pretty crazy. But looking at the amount of sales that have gone in that area gave me great confidence, because it's like, hang on a second, if every house is sold here, there's a big boom happening in this area, and I know why there's a boom happening there. I've never actually bought here before, here, not for anyone. It's just something where I found a good value off market motel. But I want to make sure that there's a lot of activity happening in the area. Are prices falling? Is there no under contracts when you go online? Is there lots of under contracts? If there's no under contracts and it says price reduce, price reduce, price reduce, I can sort of tell the way that the market is going. And I'm a contrarian investor, so I love buying properties which are on the downside. I want to see where people also are very scared in that market, and prices are on the downside. So you want to make sure you're not paying too much. You want to make sure you're not paying into a very heated market, and I think that's probably a very big risk for a lot of people right now, because there's so many people out there going, oh wow, I better get in the market. It's the market's booming. There's so much opportunity. No, buying into a hot market means that there is a lot of risk. People message me on a day-to-day basis saying, should I buy Dogecoin or whatever they want to call it, right? I bought Dogecoin. I didn't even know what the price was back then, right? It was like, I bought 2 million of them because me and my mate Mitch were like laughing, and we're like, we bought billion of these coins, right? And they went from 2 grand to 6 grand, and I sold them. And that was cool. But when I look at Dogecoin at $1 and Elon Musk out there pumping this stuff up, and the price has gone up from 1/10 of a cent all the way up to 90 cents Aussie in 3 months. There's a long way for that to fall, right? The chance of it going up is minimal. So are you buying a property in a heated market, or in a suppressed market, because in a suppressed market, the downside risk is removed because it's right down how low can it go, right? I was buying in Gladstone going back 2 years ago, 4 years ago, right? I tell people not to buy in mining towns because I don't get caught up in the hype of them, right? But for my investors, when I see value, I go and buy those things. So I'm not, people think that you need to go and buy a property because it's cheap and they go to these little towns and whatever. Cheap is not the best thing to do. You know, it doesn't mean that you're getting good value. It doesn't mean that you're getting a property it's just cheap because it's cheap. But I was buying in Gladstone. These things used to be 500 grand. They went all the way down to 50 grand. They couldn't even give away a property in Gladstone. I picked up everything in the market. There's nothing under sort of 250, 300 grand now. And you know, 400, 500 grand, it's a very heated market. There's a lot of room for it to come down. At 50 grand, you know, you can't even buy a brand new car for 50 grand now. You're buying some shitbox car. I was looking at, I had to buy some utes the other day, right? Some tradies that I'm looking at employing. And I was like, I want to go get a Toyota Hilux Workmate. They used to be $19,990. These Toyota Hilux Workmates are $30,000 plus now. Crazy, they don't even come with a trade. So buying a property for that price, very, very cheap. I know that it can't go down too much further and it's got a cash flow attached to it. So it is a screaming buy at that point. Gold Coast, let's go look at the Gold Coast. People sit there and they say, Nathan, why should I have this question to people often, and they're like, why should I buy this property? It hasn't had any growth for 10 years. And it's like, that is the point, right? I don't want to buy into a town or a city where I've seen 10% growth, 10% growth, 10% growth, 10% growth, 10% growth, because that growth is like Bitcoin right at the top, right? And I'm not saying I don't like Bitcoin. I love it. I still haven't sold any of my cryptocurrencies, apart from a couple of things along the way, which might have been a couple of grand here or there. Still got all my crypto, but would I be buying crypto today? Not so much. Like some cryptos, yeah, but yeah, a lot of them are heated, right? Why didn't you buy Ethereum at $5 or $7? Why are you buying Ethereum at $5,500, right? Until it's a great high. It's never been at 5.5 grand before. So when you're buying a property, are you buying it in an inflated market or are you buying it in a depressed market? I've been buying in the Gold Coast for the last sort of 10 years. The last 2 years of the Gold Coast, or last 12 months, sorry, of the Gold Coast, things have taken right off. People were laughing going back 10 years ago, oh, the Gold Coast, it's shit, it's crap, it's never going to go up, it's whatever. I was picking up units, and I still am picking up units for 200 grand in the Gold Coast at the moment, but they're few and far in between. I was picking up units for 150. The cheapest unit I picked up on the Gold Coast was $32,000. I picked up 4 units for $32,500. Those things are selling for like 180 now. I would never touch them with that. 30 grand or 50 grand that we could buy. But you know, that market has taken off quite considerable. So would I be buying in the Gold Coast now, going, it's the best thing ever? I buy there because it's good value, but I'm not aggressive as I used to be there. There's other areas to be buying. So make sure that the areas that you're going to are not overhyped, and you want to make sure that you know you're not buying at the top of any sort of market. A cheap property does not necessarily mean that it is a good property, and a cheap property doesn't mean that it's a bad property. A cheap property, if it's good value, is great. If a cheap property is cheap because it's a bad type of property, and I mean, you know, buying a holiday-let property, buying a property that's a retirement property, buying a student property, buying commercial property sometimes, very crap. Like some of them are very crap, some are very good. I've got lots of great commercial properties. My foundation is residential. It's very important to build a foundation of residential properties. You can't build foundation property portfolios based on commercial. It's very different, and you add a whole new layer of risk on that front. I still have a bit of a sore throat, so speaking for a long period, need a bit of water. When buying a property, how to make sure that you're not buying a lemon. You want to make sure, firstly, that you've got a good lawyer. I've seen people use conveyancers beforehand, and you know, they haven't picked up something. or even lawyers not picking up something. So you want to make sure that whoever it is, whether it be a conveyancer or a lawyer, that they are, doing all the right checks, making sure that everything's right, to protect you as the purchaser of the property. Making sure that pest and building inspections are done are crucial. You want to make sure that the home is structurally sound. If you have a property and the pest and building inspector says no, nothing's wrong with it, and then next week it's full of termites, there is recourse to the pest and building inspector, so you do have a bit of protection on that front. Pest and building inspectors get sued all the time, and there's, you don't get insurance for termites, but if there is something that was missed or whatever, then there is, potential there for recourse. So yeah, making sure that you've got the checks done to the property, and making sure that you've got, all the right protection measures in place is really, really important. So there's a lot of people that will buy properties, as I said beforehand. I'm picking up properties from 10 years ago in this market, which are 100 grand. There might be 300 grand 10 years ago. I'm picking them up for 200 grand today. That means that someone's waited 10 years, they've lost 30% of their value, and they're selling the property too cheap. So you don't want to be one of those people that'll be holding onto a property for a decade, and selling it cheaper. At the same time, you don't want to, just reading the questions coming through there, I'll come back to you shortly, Alfreda. With the property market does not go up linear. So a lot of people think that a property, unfortunately, this is just my white wall. It's not a drawing board, otherwise I'd draw all over it. I feel like drawing it as a diagram. But unfortunately, property is not a linear thing. So it doesn't just go up constantly. It might be flat for 3 years. People a few years ago, when I was buying the Gold Coast, I'm like, let's buy something for 150. It's worth 200. They revalued for 200. They're like, Nathan, I bought this thing 150, it's only valued at 200, I pulled out the equity, it hasn't gone up in value, right? It may not go up for 3 years. But then now that property's gone up from 200 to 400, people are like, fuck, I wish I'd have bought more of them. So understand that property is not linear. You need to look at, when you're acquiring that asset, that you're looking at that 5-year time frame, the 10-year time frame, and prognosticating as to where you want to be, because the property's there to perform a task on your behalf. So yeah, just a couple of notes on that. Can answer a couple of your questions. Luke, Rent Vest, have a landlord pay for my central city lifestyle and invest elsewhere in better growth markets? Correct, that's what I did to start off with. Paul, one note just on rent vesting, right? When I bought that property I was telling you about, it's 5 acres in northwestern Sydney. I bought it for 1.19 million, so about 1.2. That property today, I haven't done anything there. It's worth probably 4.5. I actually just started trying to negotiate the property next door. They want 4.5 mil for that. With that property, when I bought it, interest rate, I bought it, I think, a 940 grand loan on it, 960 grand loan that I had on the property, roughly. And I forget, it's 940, 960 grand. It's down at like 900 or less now. When I bought that property, it had like a 5% interest rate on it. So it's like 50 grand a year, $1,000 a week that it would cost to hold that property. When I bought my first principal place residence, what I did is I pushed the rents up on all of my other properties. So let's say, 100 properties, let's say I put up 20 of them at $20. There's $400 a week. I went through and I pushed up a lot of my rents to get them to around $1,000. I think I got about $800, $900 a week worth of rental increases. From tweaking the rents and pushing the rents up, I was able to build my position into getting that mortgage covered. So I was living in my house based on the income coming from my assets. So important to plan out, is it best to get a property to start off with? Is it better to get a property to live in the future? So another one here is I bought an NRAS property in Fortitude Valley when it was the peak of the market in 2014. NRAS will finish in 2024. Should I hold it? Should I hold it or sell on it? Sell it to cut losses. Too many variables there, Paul. If you want to flick me an email or flick my team an email, you can at admin@binvested.com.au. Just put that in there and just say, hey Nathan, as discussed, can you please get back to me with my thoughts? I need to know an address exactly so I can research the specific property, and I'll give some thoughts and feedback on that specifically. Obviously, I can't give you financial advice as to sell or not to sell, but I can give you my feedback as to whether, where I see things happening around here. Fred asked, how do you pick the right property manager? Of course, for those of you that don't know, I run a property management firm called Blink Property. I built it myself. I help people manage their property portfolios more like an investor would rather than a real estate agent. I found a lot of real estate agents do a poor job out there. I've had some terrific property managers over the years, but they might move around from real estate office, and I've tried to follow them, but it's a very transient business. So property managers don't stay for a long period of time. So I designed a business that would look after investors specifically, because some real estate agents are pro tenants, not pro landlords, and that's something I'm going to talk about. Something, not the next slide, a couple of slides over. So yeah, with the property manager, if you do have properties out there, everyone, I can manage your properties. Just message my team. I think I have a specific email address called Payrise, P-A-Y-R-I-S-E, like Payrise, at blinkproperty.com.au. So send over your property details to payrise@blinkproperty.com.au, and I think Shane from my office will be able to get back in contact with you. He specialises on that side of things. Chris mentioned here, I saw a comment the other day, properties depreciate, land appreciates. Do you agree that land is where the value is? Absolutely not. A lot of people think that the land is what goes up. Generally, the property does depreciate. Is the property actually depreciating, or when you're buying a property, is it like buying a car where you're paying overs for something that's glossy and shiny and all that sort of stuff? When you're buying off the plan properties, generally you're paying a big premium. But if you're buying a second-hand property that's an older one, generally you are buying well. So what I mean by that is, I have not experienced that my units have performed under what my houses have in capital cities. I have seen in some instances where the units go up even greater. A block of land in Western Sydney or a unit in Vaucluse in Sydney, which one is going to go up greater than the other one? They're both going to go up similar. So across the broad, the reason, and this is really interesting, right? And this is probably the first time I've ever said this. People will say, all these experts out there will say the land appreciates and the building depreciates. That's generally because new off the plan properties are overinflated, and you're paying all the builder and the real estate agent have a suit and tie. Did you know that when you're buying an off the plan or a brand new property, you go out, buy a property, the person who sells you that property is generally getting paid between $30,000 and $60,000 in commission, all the way up to about $100,000, just depending on how badly you're getting screwed and how badly you're getting ripped off, is dependent on the fee of what the person is getting. So if you're buying a property that your accountant has put you onto, or your financial planner has put you onto, or a property expert, wealth coach has put you onto, and you're buying it brand new off the plan, they are earning a commission check of no less than 30,000, and most likely between 50, 60,000, anywhere up to 100,000 for selling you that property that's overinflated and the valuation may not stack up. So in that instance, everything, it was never worth that. You got ripped, sort of thing. But as for the property value, like the actual property, the building, going up in value. Think about the cost of building a property. This year alone, in the last year, we have massive inflation. And I'm going to get onto inflation as a risk later on as well. But the cost of copper has gone up and tripled almost in the last year. What's copper used for? Electrical wires, it's used for plumbing, it's used in all different areas of your home. So the cost of doing your electrical and plumbing has gone up, double. The cost of labour, how much is it cost to lay a brick to build a house? That has gone up much more this year. How much has the cost of timber gone up? Lumber prices have gone up from $250 per broad feet, $250 per 1,000 broad feet. I don't know. I don't understand some Yankee sort of term. In short, the cost of timber has gone up from $250 to $1,600. It's gone up 6 times in the last year. So the cost of your flooring, your frame, all of that has gone up significantly in value. The cost of iron ore, so any of your steel or your products, your screws, your whatever in your home or your roofing has gone up. So inflation is making the cost of the asset go up. So for me, one of the biggest things that I've been buying over the last 2-3 years has been infrastructure. So I want to buy the bricks already laid. I'll buy a shitty old place that's been, chucked there. Like my big thing at the moment is buying massive buildings which have, no real use at the moment, but you couldn't rebuild them for the cost that you're paying. So that's what sort of got me into the motel game and made me build a motel industry sort of business. So yeah, the land does not always go up where the property goes down. The actual asset goes up as well. Kylie, do you think investing in Sydney and Melbourne is better off for long-term capital growth? The capital growth you mentioned is life-changing, and further to that, do you invest up to the median prices for a property in that city? For example, 1.4 million in Sydney and 800 grand in Melbourne as a guide. No, so I buy a lot of stuff in Sydney. What's my most expensive? Probably my most expensive property that I bought in Sydney is probably about 2.2 million. I've got a few, maybe like 5 that are around the $2 million price range that I bought. And then I've bought a couple in Queensland that have been in regional areas for 2 million, like big motels. I just bought a 36-room motel. It's weird, like these 36-room hotels are everywhere. I'm just thinking, not the one in Western Sydney, not the one in Cooktown, the one it's in Toowoomba actually. I bought a 36-room motel there for 2 million bucks as well. So I want to see things of value more than the stats. So to see a house in Kellyville, right? Let's just use this as an example. For those of you that know Northwest Sydney, it's sort of near my office and whatnot. A 4-bedroom house in Kellyville that'll cost you $1.4 million. The question I ask is, how can that property double and go to 2.8? There's only 1 to 2 ways that can go up now. That property, the person that's earning the income, the family that's earning the income, you've got the husband and the wife that both have to go to work to earn an income to pay for that mortgage. They can't do it on 1 income. They've got to do it on 2 incomes. So it's not like you can go, okay, we'll get the second person. Soon they're going to have to make polyamorous relationships. So like 4 people can go on, or 3 people can go on, afford to pay for a property, right? But the house to go up from 1.4 to 2.8, either the income has to go up another 100 grand a year to support that. But if the income went up, then all the other things would go up. Food, your fuel, everything would be going up due to inflation. Or the cost of holding that asset would have to come down, i.e. interest rate reductions, which interest rates are very, very low. So it puts a lot of top-end risk into buying that sort of price range. If you picked up a property for say $200,000, the mortgage on a 200 grand property at 3% or 4% would be about 3% of 200 grand would be 6 grand a year, or 120 bucks a week, or 8 grand a year at 4% interest rate. which would be $160 a week worth of mortgage. That's very achievable, right? That thing could go from 200 to 400 to 600 to 800, more affordable than a 1.4 going to 2.8 million dollars. So I want to make sure that I'm getting the right asset for the right position of my portfolio at that right journey. Because sometimes the bank will require from you to have more cash flow, more equity. When I build portfolios for investors, like I was talking to someone earlier today, they had 200 grand in cash that they could put towards the property, and I said, let's buy the first 2 properties, reassess where you're at and what the banks require from you, and then we'll go and buy the next 2. You can buy 4 straight away using that $200,000. However, if you do buy the 4 and then the bank requires something different from you, like some more cash flow or whatever, you don't have more options at that point. So you're just constantly wanting to buy yourself more and more options in any position. You want to find more outs for you to get out of a risky position. You want to be able to find yourself more options to expand and expand. So yeah, I'm very strategic as to what you need for the next property in the portfolios when I purchase them. Sorry, just speaking too much and still a bit under the weather with the flu. How to minimize risk when buying properties or farms. Just have a look at this photo here. That looks like some sort of caravan park. It's funny things that I look at nowadays. Who knows what that is? But how to minimize risk. So people often ask, you know, Nathan, you're buying properties that you've never seen beforehand, or whatever the case may be. How can you successfully purchase those properties from afar without you know, having risk? How do you know what you're buying? So I actually have a rule personally, and that is that I never ever see a property that I buy until I've bought it. I buy the property based on the worst case scenario, and I'll use this story as an example. I went out and bought a property in the Blue Mountains going back 7 years ago, and I took a mate out with me. He used to work for us, and he used to be my bank manager back in the day. And I used to smoke, so I was outside going, this thing's pretty big. It was like the biggest property I bought at the time. It was a 36-room motel in the Blue Mountains. I bought it for $1.6 million, and having a smoke, going, oh, this is such a great buy. Like, I can't believe how great of a buy it was. I'm like, oh, I would have paid 2.4 for this thing. And as I did, I flicked my smoke, and I was like, I just realized what came out of my mouth, right? I was like, I would have paid $2.4 million for this property had I had seen it, but I hadn't seen it. And I had worked all of my figures on a worst case scenario. This property I bought 6 months prior. It's an hour down the road from me. I just didn't go out to see it, maybe too lazy. I don't know why I didn't at the time. And I bought it based on every sort of worst case scenario, the risk involved, and whether like I can't even, if I knock this building over, I could chop it up and subdivide it, which is on 3 different titles. They're going to be worth 500 grand a block. So I thought, worst case scenario, this thing's screaming buy. From that day moving forward, I never went to see a property. I only see a property once I've bought it, because otherwise my emotions will get involved. I'll be like, nah, this is good, whatever. I want to be working it like a hawk. I want to be like, no, this is not how it's going to happen. I have no emotional attachment. Literally, as I came onto the webinar tonight, my team were just finalizing things. I'm trying to work out how to get the microphone to work, because it wasn't working. And I was on the phone. I don't know if people saw me because I believe this thing was on. I was on the phone. I was like chatting to a guy, and I was buying motels, right? I bought 5 motels this week, 5 for myself. And it's my hobby at the moment is building out the hotel group. And when I was on the phone to him, I was like, this guy's loving me. And I'm like, yeah, let's do that one. That's mad. So I bought it on worst case scenario. And I've factored in all of the risk. And a lot of people will, you know, I want to make sure that I'm getting pest and building inspection. if you go out to look at a property today, let's say you buy a property down the street, right? You buy a house 2 blocks away from you and you walk to the property. And when you go to look at the property, you're going to look at it and you're going to, yeah, this thing's mad, right? But really, what are you going to do? Are you a builder? Right? Do you understand, you know, what's wrong with you? Like, you can look at this, like, let's pretend that this is a house and this is a wall for the kitchen behind me, right? You're going to sit and go, oh, you know, I'm not going to turn around too far, otherwise you see me mullet. But you're going to look at the wall and you're going to be like, this thing here is, you know, is a nice wall. There's nothing wrong with it. Behind it, it could be eaten away by termites. How do you know what it is, right? Doesn't matter if you go see the property 2 streets away, it could be full of termites. So you want to make sure that, you know, you've got a pest and building inspection done. You want to make sure that you're doing all your searches for it. You want to understand that you know the area as well. So when I go into new areas, I go in there conservatively, pick up a couple of things, get a feel for it, see what's happening, see how it goes for rent or whatever. And then once I, you know, go in there, I'm like, cool, this is right. Go in there and clean out the town or the city or wherever it is, and take all the things that are very good value and get them secured. So you want to make sure that you understand the area. You know, I buy properties for my investors everywhere that I buy. I know the areas street by street. I make myself intimate with those areas, and then yeah, I know the areas where I'm going to. We're blessed today because we've got access to Google Maps. You can start seeing what's around it. You can start seeing what's happening in the area. You can look up stats. You can look up everything you want at your fingertips. You've got it on your phone. You don't even have to go to your computer and log in and hear the modem go like we've gone on your 56K modem back in the early 2000s. Research, understand the area, understand the market, as I said beforehand, recent sales, other properties currently on the market, the time that they take to sell, understand what's driving the market up. Is that sustainable? Understanding what is underlying, you know, is it a mining town and you're buying something based on commodities? Are those commodities required? What will the need be for them in the future? Why is it busy at the moment? Is it because they're doing a mine expansion and all the trades and services need to go, and it's got 5,000 people there today, but it's only needs 100 in 2 years' time? You want to know why these areas are going or what is actually driving the market. And by no means, like, I buy properties in every single corner. Make no mistake, doesn't matter if it's over in the top of Western Australia, whether it be in the back of Adelaide, whether it be in Perth. I don't normally sit there and tell everyone exactly where I'm buying, because I've got all these other people that try and pretend to be like Nathan, that have, you know, property companies. They try and, you know, go, oh, Nathan, I'm buying here. When I show that I'm buying there, it's too late because I've taken everything into town. So, but I do buy from end to end of the country. I love capital cities. Last year we went in and picked up Perth. Look at the price of Perth now. I was picking up units in Perth. Still recently, like, I've had one the other day where we bought for 155,000 for someone, a couple others for 180,000 in the city. You can't build inner city properties for those prices. If you look at Brisbane, I'm picking up in Brisbane for 170 now. Cheapest thing I picked up in Brisbane was $90,000 for 20Ks from the CBD for a unit. The rent's like $250 a week. Yeah, so capital cities, out of capital cities, doesn't matter where it is, you need to understand the area, whether you physically go to the area. The portfolios that I share with you guys on a regular basis, which I'm buying on behalf of my investors, you know, they're not going out to the properties. They don't need to see the properties because they've had the knowledge. That's what they're paying for from me as their buyer's agent. So you could get a buyer's agent, you could employ someone like myself to act on your behalf to help you, you know, not make those mistakes. Don't get caught up in the hype of an area. I keep going back to that Dogecoin, the doggy coin, right? Dogecoin, right? People like see all these forums. Every time I go on Facebook, there's all these groups and stuff that have got into these Facebook things that everyone's like, oh, Dogecoin is going to go to 10 bucks. It's going to go to this. I'm like, it's physically impossible. It'd be worth more than the whole world in total because there's so much of this crap. People don't understand how the fundamentals work, and they just get caught up in the hype, the FOMO. And then once again, that's why I said at the start of this, your emotions, your emotional intelligence is very important, because you won't let it rule you, you won't let it make decisions. You'll be buying based on fundamentals and making decisions based on fundamentals. So yeah. The other thing as well, this is a good question that Kylie asked beforehand, is would I go up to the $1.4 million price or the 800 grand in Melbourne as a guide? I have a certain threshold. I don't buy properties that are too expensive. I want to make sure I'm getting a shitload of infrastructure for my money. I want to make sure that I can't rebuild the property. If I'm buying a 2-bedroom townhouse in Brisbane for 170 grand, I want to make sure that I can't rebuild, or no one can rebuild it for that price, because that'll do one of two things. If you're buying the property below rebuild cost, it means that there'll either be developers that come in and have to pay 500 grand. You have to pay 500 grand to buy a new one, where if you have a new one at 500 and an old one at 170, means that people will go, why am I paying 500 for this one? The market will creep up. This might go to 350 and this one might be 500. And the market will get pushed up and sucked in a vortex. The other thing is that if you're buying it at 150 and there's no developers and it's not profitable and the market's not there for $500,000, it means that the developers won't be building. This thing here will be pushed up because they have a pent-up demand of people buying, because there's not enough stock in the market, and it'll naturally push the price up. So I want to be buying things ideally less than the infrastructure cost to build it. And I see people go to these regional towns, so being very careful, like, and this is why I don't say I go and buy in mining towns too often. And I say I don't buy in mining towns actually because people just think, oh, Nathan said 200 grand, so it has to be in a mining town or a regional town. I see people going to spend $500,000 in a regional town. I'd be wanting to buy a block of units for that. I'd be wanting to buy a shopping centre, or I'd be wanting to buy something large and substantial for $500,000. In a regional town. I would not be buying. I was buying blocks of 10 units for 200 grand in Tamworth, right? There is no way that I would be going to Tamworth to spend $500,000 for a residential house, right? At maybe 500,000 a day for a block of 10 units, I'd say, okay, that may look like some good value there. There may be some upside and good cash flow, etc. So I'd be, really cautious of what I'm actually getting when going to buy a FAR. So, if you need help, probably the best place to start is reach out to us. You can send us an email or give us a buzz or whatever. I buy these things every day for myself and for investors. I do go to the areas, I go look at them and whatnot, but I don't go and see them before I buy them, because that's where your feeling of excitement or whatever. Like if I said to you, I could buy you a brand new Rolls Royce today for 100 grand, you'd be like, yeah, that's cool, it's worth it, right? But if you could have bought it for 50 grand, that would have been better, because if you go, what happens if the brakes go? What happens if the engine's gone? What would happen if this is gone? You've worked it down and go, okay, well, if I have to sell off all the bumper bars of what I can see, then I'm going to get at least my 50 grand back. So the risk is sort of minimized. So yeah, water bottle, water cup. Any questions, guys? Keep them coming through. What have we got here? Managing the risks with tenants. So a lot of the time people will ask me, how do you manage, over 200 properties in your portfolio? Aren't you scared about tenants that don't pay rent? Over the years, I've had meth labs, I've had people getting shot, I've had probably 10 properties burned down that I've had. I've had, tenants that don't pay rent, tenants that trash the place, tenants that try to extort me, squatters that try and come in. You can have bad things with tenants. I've never once sat there and gotten scared. I've never gotten sad. Tenants, they're part of the ecosystem, right? And with it, just noticing here, Kylie said, do you have problems with tenants purchasing low value properties, paying rent, etc., and damaging the properties, for example, low value properties in the north and south have greater risk. That's my concern, purchasing low value properties in states and areas that I don't know. Yeah, look, it's important to have good processes and systems and procedures. I've had bad tenants. I've had situations where things go wrong. Every time I've had a bad tenant, I haven't really been out of pocket because the tenant doesn't pay the rent. The insurance comes in. So everybody needs to have landlord insurance. Make sure you have landlord insurance. I actually have a rule for Blink Property, which is my business. We don't take on, if you don't have landlord insurance on your property, I don't want to look after your property, right? Because you're probably going to be too much of a tight ass and cut corners and put too much pressure on us. If you have insurance, then there's ways that we can minimize risk. If something goes wrong, then we can get the insurance company to pay. I actually had Michelle, who runs the Queensland office, who's a licensee there. She's here in New South Wales at the moment, and she ran out this afternoon. She's like, there's this bell, and she's hitting the bell, and she's like, whoa, 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 right? And there was an owner of ours which had her properties with another agent. She had a block of 6 units. It was in an area which it was in Cairns, so we weren't managing properties at the time when we bought it in Cairns, and now we manage everywhere. And we took over a property because the properties were all vacant and they got trashed, and someone had like a fire in the floor and whatever. And she was going to sell the properties off, and the properties were so damaged she couldn't sell them. And she went and did the reno herself. I don't know how much it cost. Maybe it cost 50 grand, 60 grand, 70 grand, 80 grand, whatever. Michelle's been fighting it out for 6 months, and she ran out because she got an email to say that there was an insurance payout for 70 grand. So basically the properties all got a full renovation. They were all painted, all carpeted, new kitchens, everything done to the works. I think it was 4 out of 6 that got damaged, and yeah, we were able to get that for the investor. Wasn't even something that had happened on our clock, but we're able to make that happen because the processes were in check. Make sure you have insurance. Make sure you have a good property manager that's going to be on top of the tenants. I always say I run my office more like a hedge fund, so I'm trying to extract every sort of cent that I can and every dollar that I can out of the property for my owners. But also have applied. I've got people that work in my office that have worked in sort of debt collection and whatnot before, and so I've got processes and procedures in place in order to ensure that the tenants are we keep the arrears low, to ensure that things don't get out of hand. So you need a good property manager to manage your affairs for you. But if the tenant does a runner, then it's covered from insurance. Cheap end properties, just to answer your question, Colin, cheap end properties do not mean that you're going to find a bad tenant. I've got tenants which have got taps that are missing, and they just put a new tap handle on. They're like, it's okay. The carpet's a bit frayed. They put a rug over it. And there was one property that I worked on, my first property actually. I worked on it a lot, and the emotion, right? And the tenant, I became to know the tenants that are in there, and I remember he's been there for like 10 years or whatever, and he's does little things around the property himself, and he's really happy and proud and whatever. This guy pays his rent every time, whatever. You can get good and bad and everywhere. How many middle class areas do you see where there's a good couple that might go in there, and then suddenly one leaves and the other one's having parties every day, and the place gets trashed and there's no rent paid and there's car parks in it and whatever. Someone might say, oh, I'll just go there, right? I'll just say what a lot of people are thinking. You go to the western suburbs, westy area, and you find a bowl, right? There's a bowl on the table. Someone's doing a bit of weed. They've got 20 bucks worth of weed. They have a cone or whatever they call it, and people are like, oh, how dare they? Whatever. My rent getting paid, whatever the extracurricular activity, it's not my problem. Rent gets paid. Don't fuck up my house. We're cool. At the same token, right? I've had properties in Vaucluse, right, that I own, and if someone's in Double Bay, right? Double Bay is known as the cocaine capital of Australia. So, do you think that you don't have problems with drugs or whatever in an area which is more affluent than an area that's not. It's finding good people, finding wholesome people that are going to be renting your property and managing them. I don't care what my tenants get up to. They could do whatever they want to do. Don't fuck my place, don't steal from me, we'll be fine. If you do, then we'll have issues. But that's what we have to manage. I've got, as I say, Blink Properties, my property management firm. And all the businesses that I've built, I've got dozens of different businesses in all different areas of business. And property management is one of those ones which I'm like, if I wasn't doing this as out of passion and trying to help people, trying to get the best result out there, it is a painful business because you have to manage all of these things. A real estate agent doesn't cut it for me. They don't get the outcome that I'm looking for. So hence why I set it up. Having a good property manager is worth their weight in gold. If you need help, just remember Payrise, PAYRISE at blinkproperty.com.au. Send an email over to the team, and we'll see what we can get. I was on the phone to someone today earlier, and this guy, he's got 3 properties and started his investing journey last year, and looking at getting him, we can get him an extra 1 now, but I'm looking at the next sort of 3 or 4. And I was asking him, like, what's happening with the rents? And one of the properties we had to give back to the selling agent of the property. We couldn't take it over because it was just an agreement that they gave to us so cheap if they kept the management. And I asked him, well, what's the rent on it? And he goes, $350 a week. And I was like, fucking $350 a week. Should be getting $450. So that's $100 just by putting that rent up. So over the next couple of days and weeks, we will take over that property. We will the property's in lease. He said that the tenant's in lease still of that property for another couple of months. That's fine for the transition of the property coming from another agent. It doesn't matter if they're in a lease or not. We can still manage that tenant, still manage the lease. But there's 2 months or so left on that lease. When we get the property, we have to give them 60 days notice to put the rent up. We put the rent up, he gets an extra $100 a week. There's an extra $5 grand a year. If you had that on 5 properties, there's an extra $5 grand a year, another 50 grand a year, sorry. You want to make sure also that your property manager pays all your accounts. So it's a big one. It's probably not on the same topic as managing risk, but just managing the cash flow and the fiddly parts of a portfolio. If you are managing everything yourself, right? Imagine if I got 200 bills from council, 200 bills from water, 200 bills from strata, from insurance. That's 4 sets of bills per quarter that I'd be getting. 4 sets of bills would be, let's say it takes 2 minutes each. That's 2 minutes times 4 is 8 minutes per property. Times that by 200, it'd be like 1,600 minutes. 60 minutes per hour. You're looking at like 3 days worth of entering bills in and whatnot. It'll become a nightmare. You want to make sure that your property manager takes care of all the council, the water, the strata, the insurance, whatever. Maybe the insurance if you want to look after it yourself, but make sure it's done on time. If you've got a good property manager, it happens all systematically, and it's a part of their process and a part of the software. Each month, I actually had Michelle say to me today, that she's going to do the mid-month payment tomorrow instead of on Saturday. And basically what will happen is the software will do its thing. It will send me a ABA file, which is like a sort of file that you upload to your bank, and I can print out like thousands of bills and payments at once. So everybody's stratas and all that sort of stuff gets taken care of and gets paid all in one hit. So just by pushing a button. So make sure the property manager takes care of all that for you. And then finally, like a lot of people get caught up on, what happens if the property sits vacant for 3 months or 6 months or 12 months or whatever. I think it's important to have a little bit of a buffer per property. If you aren't getting rent in that period of time, well, nearly spilled my water. I'm losing my voice. I had no voice this time last week, no voice. It wasn't looking pretty. Not that it looked pretty anyway, but vacancy rates, you want to manage those vacancy periods. So most of the properties that I have, I've never had a property that sits there vacant for a year or 2 years. I have actually had a couple, but there have been ones that have been burned and damaged, and insurance is paying me out, and always end up in a really cool position. You know, great for oh wow, you know, sad to see that one go. But it's something that, yeah, having vacancy periods, if there's a property that has no tenant in it, you know, if everything else is renting for $300 a week and you've got a price at $350, generally it comes down to price. So if you can lower the price of it and make sure it's in line with the market, you know, it's important to make sure that it's marketed right. Most of the properties on average that I manage, I'm getting about $30 a week more than the average local property manager in the area. So it's important to have good processes there to minimise that. And I try to have sort of pre-approval sort of situations where tenants inquire about a property, my team keep them, if they're really good looking applications, and then we try and nurture them and put them onto another property and keep that tenant and take them into other properties. So yeah. Scott, talking about risk, do you see the risk of the share market at the moment? Can you explain why property is a better bet? Good question, way off topic of you know, the property aspect, but you know, it's a good conversation anyway. I personally am not invested in any paper assets, so I'm invested into some of the most weirdest and wackiest things. Shipping containers. I've got shitloads of shipping containers. There we go, shitloads of shipping containers. Metal, scrap metal. I actually have dumping grounds in each state where people dump scrap metal into my shipping containers, and then they get sent off into the bush and then keep them all. And you know, there's different sort of processes like that. I am invested in the most randomest and weirdest things. I'm not invested in anything in the share market at the moment for a couple of reasons. Most importantly is that we've got one of the biggest recessions going on, and it is a depression, but people don't realise yet because it's been papered over with lots of stimulus checks being printed. A lot of the companies out there are insolvent. They are operating insolvent. There's a thing called zombie companies. They are, you know, zombie companies. They're dead, but they're still alive. Why are they going up? They're being manipulated. Some shares are, you know, fair value out there, but most of the market is just overhyped, overpumped. A lot of zombie companies, and I think that the market is too risky. There's too much risk. There's too much upside, too much downside risk for it to fall, but not enough upside. How high can they go? They're just printing. The stock market is currently built up from a lot of quantitative easing. The central banks are buying up the balance sheet of the stock market. It's an artificial market. It's being held up. You know, what happens if these companies implode? A lot of the companies are also tied in with each other with you know, different sorts of derivatives and stuff like that. So, for example, Deutsche Bank, that's my favorite bank to talk shit about. You know, that Deutsche Bank should be, there's so many reports out there on the internet, you know, from all the things that I've seen, it is insolvent from having, you know, liquidity in it. So there's a lot of derivatives. So what caused the GFC, when we had the global financial crisis back in 2008, 2009, was about $7.5 to $8.5 trillion worth of derivatives in the market, in the housing market. That caused global recession. Since then, there's been derivatives created on almost everything. If you don't know what a derivative is, go and research it. It's not the topic for discussion, but it's, you've seen The Big Short, it's cat shit wrapped in dog shit. It's fraud. Go watch The Big Short. It's probably a very good video and very fitting at the moment to see that and look at some of the comparisons, because some of the companies out there, you're like, how did you get the valuations? How did you get the risk? How did you get the ratings of these companies be so strong? But there's so many derivatives. So there's talks that and reports that there's literally about 50 to 60 trillion dollars worth of derivatives attached to that one bank. So what caused the global financial crisis going back a decade ago? One bank holds 10 times that amount just on their balance sheet. There's over 1.2 trillion before Corona worth of derivatives. The banking system was falling in September 2019 due to the repurchasing agreements and the bond market out there. So who is owning the bonds? Who is holding the bonds? Who is holding the bag? They're all paper assets. If you can't hold it, you can't own it, you don't own it. I don't own physical, I own physical metals, whether it be copper, right? The other day I was actually towing a ton of copper. Random story, right? Towing a ton of copper. I was laughing to my mate that I was with. I was like, we'll go over speed ups and hear it clanging around in the back of the ute. And it's like people think they're cool driving around their cool hired car and all that sort of stuff. When I say hired car, I mean like the sports car that's leased or whatever. Here we are just driving around in the ute with a ton of copper going around in the back. And I was like, bro, I feel so rich right now owning this. Whilst most people are on the markets trading ETFs, paper contracts on silver, research the silver squeeze out there. If you don't own your silver, you don't own it, right? The synthetic paper contracts aren't worth anything if you can't get your hands on it. There could very well be a bank run style, run on these paper contracts one day, which would see people that think they own these assets that own nothing. So I don't own paper assets, shares, ETFs, any sort of derivatives, not what I'm investing into, or bonds. They're probably the worst things, the most riskiest thing out there. Luke, are you hearing of risk from bank valuations coming back too low at settlement, given it's hard to establish recent comparables in such hot markets? I am hearing it a little bit, but that is more towards the that new stock, so that bullshit sort of stock that's out there. I know people very well in sort of that sell properties that are brand new, off the plan, subdivision sales people and all that sort of stuff. And they're telling me that their developers have had a property on a land release 2 weeks ago at $500,000 or $600,000, and now those same blocks identical, nothing changed. They just decided to put the price up to 700, 720,000, and they're going. People are buying them. They're just walking out the door. They've just added 100 grand to the block of land price because they get to set the prices and get to set the market. And they know that it could be recourse when it comes time to valuation, and they have a buffer in their business model to understand that. But if they can get it, they get it. And some of the land and some of the properties are coming back a bit shy. But once that market and that threshold gets hit, then it's running all the way through there. So it's managing risk with finance, that is one risk. If you're buying a property off the plan and the market does change, then you may not get a loan for it in the future. Managing risk, you could either have too much debt or not enough debt in your portfolio. So if you're too over leveraged, you could be screwed. If the market changes, if you get too under leveraged, you could be too screwed. And what I mean by under leveraged, no one ever thought this was something that you'd be able to see or that would be talked about going back 3, 4, 5 years ago, because they didn't see the level of inflation we're seeing. And I saw it because it was in the financial markets. It was very clear and evident in charts. I did a 5-part webinar on this. So if you guys are new around here, if anyone's new watching this stuff, I have a 5-part webinar series on YouTube, youtube.com/B.Invested. And in the video, I don't know, the channel bit up the top, you can find there's a webinar. It's I forget what it's called. It was a webinar. You'll see it's a 5-part webinar. They're all like 2 hours like this. And I talked about why we would see the crash. And for some reason we've called it a virus, and I actually don't even care about getting censored because this is a private video section that I'm not putting on YouTube. But I never would have thought they'd blame it on a virus and illness and whatnot. But they did, and that's why I called it a scam. I never said there wasn't a virus. I never said there wasn't an illness. I didn't say people were getting sick or not getting sick. I found that they were mopping the floor and blaming a lot of things to a certain illness, and that is where the scam is at. So just setting the record straight. But yeah, having not enough debt could be an issue because if we go to a negative interest rate territory where the bank is paying someone, then you could be getting paid to have that debt. If you if you are under leveraged, don't have enough assets, everything is rising around you, the cost of living is rising, you don't have options. So if you have assets, then you have options to either sell off those assets or increase the cash flow on those assets, and you've got more cash flow to survive via a heavy inflation territory, i.e. hyperinflation should that occur. Poor structuring around your finance. I see people, this is probably the biggest one. I see people that are scared of debt. I'm scared of not having enough debt, which is a big issue for me. A lot of people, that come in that have the issues. Yes, that was the raw and uncut series, Andrea. Yes, so go to YouTube, youtube.com/B.Invested. Go and look in the channel, got the groups in there, and it's called the raw and uncut series. Someone said it sounded like a porno. That's the name of raw and uncut. No, wasn't that. But that was the series of it. So it's about 10 hours of videos explaining what would happen, etc. And we're definitely seeing that. So poor structuring is where the loans are structured where they're either cross-collateralized, with the wrong banks, you've bought with the wrong. People get stuck with finance. If you can't finance your goals, you can't reach your goals. So you need to have the right financing in place in order for you to keep going. It's not by chance someone's at 10, 15, 20 properties in their portfolio. It's either they've got the money to do it or they don't. If you could want to buy 20 properties, but if you can't afford it, then you can't buy it. So you need to have the right structuring, the right planning around that to be able to pull it off. Where are we at? And Understand, you said you don't invest in shares. How do you feel about superannuation? So I'm going to grab a tissue here, folks. Can't believe I've lasted 2 hours of chatting non-stop. I'm not a fan of super, and I can't give financial advice around that. I don't have a super fund. People that are close to me don't have super funds. A lot of my investors don't have super funds. They have self-managed super funds. In your super fund, we've all seen Wolf of Wall Street. That is your super fund, is that sort of activity. Pole of communist, totalitarian, fascist, which are controlling your money. Most people would have 100 grand, 200 grand, 300 grand, 400, 500. I speak to people with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of money in their super fund, and they go, I ask them, like, who's got your super? Where's your super with? And they go, I don't know where my super is at. I think it's with this place, or I think it's with that. Okay. Some people might say, yes, it's with this company. It's like, cool. So you've got $500,000 or $250,000 invested in this company. What is it invested in? I don't know. They just invested. It's invested in the shares. Okay, well, what shares do they invest in? I don't know. It's the person that deals with it. Okay, cool. Who at that company do you deal with? I don't know, right? If people literally have hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not, $500,000 or $1 million worth of money in their super fund, that's your fucking money in your super fund, but they don't know where it's at. They don't know who's got it. If you can't answer any of those questions, you should be taking more understanding of it. Could you, potentially be doing something greater? Could you be building a property portfolio? Could you be, I don't care if you don't want to go and buy a property in your super fund, but you should at least know where that money is invested and taking a greater attention to, could you control it? A lot of you guys in the community knew that we're going to see a financial crisis. What did your super fund do to protect you at that period of time? Did they, take it out for a little while, and did they put it back into there? What was the loss at that point in time? What was the dip? Everyone can sit there and say, oh, my super was at 200 grand in January 2020, and then it went down to $100,000 in February 2020, and now in May 2021 it's back to 230,000. So it's actually a little bit ahead. Okay, cool. But in 2020 January, when you had 200,000, you could have bought a car cheaper, you could have bought a house cheaper, you could have bought Bitcoin at $2,000, you could have bought fucking hamburgers at McDonald's for $1, which are now $2.50 as the entry price for a hamburger at McDonald's. So your purchasing power, even though you might feel like you still got 250 grand and you might be a little bit higher than we had at the start of last year, your purchasing power's gone and inflation's gone up the value of it. So, people that I know that have self-managed super funds, as I said, I can't give advice around this, but I can put you in contact with the right people by reaching out to my team. Everyone here can get access to those people that can help you out. You could have bought Bitcoin with it. You could have bought gold. You could have owned physical pieces of metal. You could have bought shares that you want. You could have said, well, I've got $500,000 in my super fund. I could use that to go and buy an afterpay shares when they're $5, not when they're $100. But what did your super fund do for you? You can't control it, so that's a massive risk. You want to take control of, your position. So if you do have a super fund, which is everybody that's in this webinar tonight would have that. If you do have a super fund, you should take greater notice of it. If you need help on that front, you can email my team at admin@binvested.com.au and just put in there as a heading, super fund, how can you help me, or whatever, and I can put you in contact with the right people. But with finance, a lot of people feel like the inability to pay off their debt. Do you need to pay off your debt? Right? A lot of people are like, oh, I want to pay out the debt, I want to pay off the loan, etc. That's not, sort of, is that the wisest move to pay it off? Everybody's position is different. By the time I die, I'd hope to pay out my debt, but my debt has become worthless. I've got $17 million worth of debt. It's going down by about $500,000 a year after paying off my $500,000 a year worth of debt. So in the next 30 years, I'll pay out all my mortgages. Maybe the next 20 years, all my mortgages will be paid out. But my asset position keeps rising, my cash flow position keeps rising, and that debt becomes more and more less valuable. So, as I said beforehand, with finances, I see a lot of people going out and they get told from their broker, you can borrow 800 grand. They go and buy a property for 900 grand. They're stuck paying that mortgage. They have to get out of work every day. They have to get out of bed, go to work. It's pretty boring sort of, and mundane sort of activity, having to keep going to do that because you're stuck in the debt trap where you're servicing that one property. Do you need to have that big property? If the bank says you can borrow 800, you could still go and buy a 500 grand property and have surplus cash flow and lifestyle. So just because the bank says you can go do it doesn't mean that's what you should go buy. That's why we see prices rise, because servicing becomes better and the prices allow for people to spend more money. Probably the finance side of things, I see a lot of people trying to overdo it with that principal place, as I just said. If it's not your dream home, don't overstretch yourself for it, right? It's just a roof over your head until you do get to that dream home. So could you, either you have to work really hard to go buy that dream home, or you could get your assets and your investments working really hard in order to go and do that. I think it's important to minimize risk as well by continuously looking at your finance options and how you structure that debt. For example, people don't pay attention. They go, oh, the broker said to me I should go and get a loan with this bank, etc. I just noticed a message from Lyndall that come through. I'm going to just use an example which you can relate to really well. Is that, like, you could go and buy a property. Like some people I speak to on a day-to-day basis, they could buy a property today. They might have equity. They can go buy the property, but instead, right, you could buy a specific type of property, right, that boosts your cash flow, and you could possibly go back and pull out more equity with that good bank, and then go and take that equity to go and buy, instead of buying one property, you could buy 4 or 5 with that. I see people that get stuck in a position where they might go and get a loan with this bank because it's got the cheapest interest rate, ING or fucking Pepper or Macquarie or whoever the bank is. They may go and get loans with the lender, and then they go, oh, well, I want to sell my principal place of residence now. I want to go and retire or upsize or downsize, and they can't use that loan facility to move on. If they had had the right structuring at the start, they could keep that loan facility open in perpetuity. So you could, for example, there's a lot of investors don't realize this, a lot of wealth experts out there don't realize this stuff. don't specialize in it, don't know it, they can't sell a product from it, so they don't talk about it, their intellect isn't great enough to understand it, whatever the excuse is. But there's a lot of people that have loans which they can sell the property off. So if you've got a property, you go, I don't want to deal with this property anymore, I want to get rid of it, but I can't buy another one. You could technically keep that loan alive if it's set up correctly, and then purchase another 1 or 2 properties. So I've got a few people at the moment which I'm doing security swaps for. They've bought a property, it's gone up, done its thing, they're selling it off, and they might have a 500 grand loan facility, and they go, well, I want to sell it off, I'm selling it for $1 million, selling it for whatever. I want to keep that 500 grand loan and buy 3 more cheaper properties. They might have screwed themselves up by buying 1 big property or 2 properties that are hurting them on a cash flow perspective. They want to sell it, but they're scared that they can't get a loan. They can keep that loan facility open if the loan facility is set up right, and purchase more properties on top of that loan and build out a new portfolio using an existing loan. So if you need help on that front, as I said, hit us up. But I think it's important, like if you could buy 4 or 5 properties, like I'm getting back on track to the person that I was just talking about in the question thread. If someone was to buy, you could buy 3 properties today or 2 properties using some capital that you may have. Or if you structure it right, just buy 2, wait a couple of months, and then go buy the next 2. You could build out your position far greater than what you thought you could. So someone thought they could come in and buy maybe 1 property in their portfolio. I reckon I can get them to 5 properties quite quickly, given if we do a couple of really slow maneuvers to boost up the cash flow position for the bank, to get equity how we need it out from the bank, and then move on to the next lender. So choosing the lenders in the right order is important. Being strategic with when you get the loan with a specific lender, when it's time to go visit that lender. You start off with the good lenders and then work your way down the list to the shit ones. You want to make sure that you're not crossing your loans, and you've got flexibility. With your loans, you want to have as much flexibility to move as free as you wish, because that's what's important in the later parts of your portfolio. Remembering you've got a 30-year loan term attached to these properties, right? You need to think about in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the track, if you don't service for that loan, if you're at the older stage of your portfolio and you're at retirement and you can't go get a new loan, how is that loan going to last you through retirement and not be forced or squeezed to sell off an asset? You guys in here may, a lot of you guys are younger, you're below your 50s and whatever, you may be older than 50, and you might be like, shit, how am I going to keep my properties till I'm 80 and not have to worry about selling them off when I'm 65? They're things that you need to be considering. The finance structure that you set up today is really crucial, so make sure that you have someone that understands finance very, very well. To answer your question, for your properties, do I pay principal interest or interest only, or a combination depending on the property? I've always set my properties off to be interest only to start off with, and then over time they become principal interest. So the way I see it is that you go through different phases. So you go through, some people go through an education phase. You may still be in that education phase. You may still be watching and not doing stuff. You may have started off 5 years ago watching and then you started doing. So education, accumulation, and then the consolidation phase. In the accumulation phase of your cycle, like when you start buying, you might buy probably for the next 3 years ago, bang, 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 you buy 20 properties, 10 properties. Once you build out that position, in that period, you want to refinance, pull out the equity, wherever the deposit's going to come from, that's what you want to buy the next property. So if you're going to go back and rip out the equity, why are you paying off $50 a week on a mortgage? And this is not financial advice for anyone that wants to try and screw me on this. If there's any government commies that are watching that are from a department to try and go, why is Nathan saying this? It's not financial advice. Just questioning, and this is what I question to myself, is why would I want to pay off $50 a week on my mortgage? If I had 10 of them, $50 a week, it's nothing really, right? But if I had 10 properties that I'm paying $50 off, that's $500 a week. That's 26 grand a year. That's going to take a hit to my cash flow. Why would I want to be paying off my mortgage when I'm going to go back to the bank? I'm going to pay off 26 grand this year and then go back to the bank and say, excuse me, bank, can I please have some of my money back? Can I please have 50 grand so I can go and get equity? It wouldn't make sense. So I try and retain as much capital as I can throughout the active part of my portfolio. And then reality is you want to pay off your mortgage and you're paying 3% interest. If you had $1 million mortgage today and you had $1 million cash laying in your bank account, you've got a few options, right? You could go and spend that $500,000, you could go spend $1 million, pay your mortgage and save 3% interest. What will you be achieving by doing that? You'd be saving $30,000 a year. At the same time, with that same $1 million, you could go and buy $1 million worth of new asset, and if it brought in a 7% sort of interest or return on the property, then that $1 million would bring in $70,000 per year. $70,000, you could take 30, pay off your mortgage, and you still have $40,000 cash that's left over. Looking at that position, instead of having that one property paid off for $1 million that goes from 1 million to 2 million, you would have $2 million worth of assets to go from $2 million to $4 million. So what would your position rather be? Would you rather have 2 mil turn to 4 mil or 1 mil turn to 2 mil with only one asset? So for me personally, in the accumulation phase, it's about acquiring the asset. That's what's important. My properties nowadays, I think they're all actually, there might be one or two that are still interest only, but they're all principal and interest. That's just the way the loans have expired and gone to principal and interest. But over the course of the last 5 years, I've been able to boost my cash flow position up. So if you're buying a property that's neutral cash flow today, in 5 years' time when it goes to principal and interest, then my thought behind it is that my cash flow from the extra rent, it might have gone up $50 a week. That extra rent from the property is now paying down the debt. Doesn't really bother me. So it just depends on what phase of your journey at. As I was saying right at the start of the webinar, you know, are you at a growth phase or are you at a consolidation phase? If you're consolidation, then yeah, let's pay it down. But if you're in a growth phase, you're going to be trying to find anywhere that you can get your next deposit. I have investors and I can see their names in here. People are like, I'm going to sell my car so I can buy a shit car. Nathan, you told me that story once where you sold your car for 40 grand a week after buying it. It was probably like 2 months after buying it. I sold a car and then I was driving a $200 car just because that's what I needed to do to get the deposit for the property, and then later I went and bought another car. So, you know, you'd do anything for a deposit. Why would you want to be paying all your cash flow out? That's my mindset behind it. So I hope that answers the question. Chris asked as well, what's your thoughts? I'm going to go to my next slide. What's your thoughts on hobby-based investing? Hobbies like trading cards, pinball, cars have all gone up drastically in the last 12 months. I love hobby investing. That's a good topic. I'm actually going to make a little note of that to do a video on that. Actually, hobby. I was the geek who collected all the cards at school. Leave it on me Sharpie or whatever it is, the thing, hobby investing. I collected cards, I collect all different things. Well, I think there's lots of value out there in that, but you've got to question yourself, like, is it something that's already been very highly inflated? And is there a lot of risk on the downside? Like a trading card is really just a piece of paper with printing on it, right? If it's 100 grand for a card, there's a lot of risk for that one thing. There's no fundamentals underneath it. It's not bringing any cash flow. There's a lot of speculation, etc. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of buying high-end hobby investments, but little things like yeah, kind of look. Yeah, so with the I've collected old cars, right? So I've got dozens of old shitbox cars, old Datsuns and old Nissans and old Daihatsus and old Corollas and old Kingswoods and all that. Then I picked up for a couple of grand each, and now they've all gone up to $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. Old MR2s, really mint stuff that like Granny One Owner special sort of things that I picked up for a couple of grand each. I still pick up those things on Gumtree every now and then and invest, but it's not bringing me to cash flow, and it's not something I can leverage, and it is very speculative. So yeah. One of the risks that people talk about all the time is what happens if interest rates go up. I just realized, like, wow, like we've gone through a lot of time. Thanks for watching and staying online. It's 2 hours. Thanks for having me as a part of your evening. I'm going to get through these pretty quickly because there's still a few slides. So what happens if interest rates go up? Firstly, you need to understand how interest rates work. Understand that interest rates have not gone up for 10 years from the RBA level. If interest rates go up, then there's going to be a lot of problems out there with other areas of the economy, i.e. the government's just done $1 trillion worth of debt to the nation, and we're going to have to pay a higher interest rate on that. The country could go broke, so we're stuck at 0% interest rate policy out there. Everyone is going to get screwed. But if interest rates go up, there is lots of things that you can do to sort of protect yourself. There could be a point where you could go, okay, I really foresee that interest rates could go up quite aggressively. We could fix interest rates as an option. But most importantly, you know, understand how the economy works to see is that really a big threat, you know, in the market. A lot of people think back to the 1990s, if interest rates went up by 1% or 2% a day, half the economy would be KO'd and people would be bankrupted everywhere. So the other thing is if interest rates go up, something would cause it to happen. Probably a hyperinflation would be after things have gone massive with the inflation. And at that point, rents would probably go up as well. So renovations, people talk about doing renos with properties. How do you manage risk with renovations? Biggest one I see out there, people paying too much for a reno. Have a budget for your reno. Have an understanding of how the renovation could work. Don't let your emotion keeps popping up to kill you on different things. Don't get emotionally attached to it. You're not going to live in the house. Been so many times where I've carefully cut in every bit of paint in the property and made the place look amazing, and I walk in next time and there's like fucking pinholes, there's shit on the carpet, all that sort of stuff. People aren't going to care about your reno as much as you do. You need to work out with reno, is a reno going to be done for a sale or is it going to be done for a rental? If you're going to sell the property, there's some things that you would do differently than if you're going to do one for a sale versus a rental. Need to question what really needs to be done, what's going to get the best value, the best bang for your buck. If it's a house that's got a structural issue, you probably spend 50 grand on fixing the structural issue and you probably see no difference. Is it just a little tidy up? We can roll out new lawn out the front, put some pebbles in the garden, put some pebbles in the driveway, make a new driveway out of pebbles, and you know, make it look pretty. And the other thing is as well, like people sometimes look for problems in a property to find new things. Like you start doing renos and you go, oh shit, there's termites here, we've got to fix this up, we've got to take that wall out. Sometimes it's best to not look too far and go, no, this is where we're going to finish it, this is how it's going to be. We want tenants in there, you want to get it back on track. I see people that go way too far. How many times have you been past a property which is just basically a pile of sticks out there, it's a gutted shell, and someone's had this great grand dream of doing something, and then they could have really rented it straight away from the start, but now they've gone bankrupt because of over-capitalized, not had a good budget or whatnot. So make sure you've got a budget, make sure that you structure your trades well, make sure that you plan your renovations well, in order to get the job done. Managing your portfolio from a compliance and from legal ramifications, have good compliance, have good governance with what you do and how you carry yourself, have everything in emails, have good paper trails of what you do, make sure you have good communication in trails in case something goes wrong, have a good property manager that can help you minimize risk with your tenant, make sure that you have good systems and procedures in place should something go wrong, that you do protect yourself. Other areas, make sure you've got a prenup in place, make sure that you've got a will in place. A lot of people don't have wills, people die, things go wrong. You know, you want to be able to make sure that you can still make moves outside of you know, your life where you are at the moment. So if you've worked really hard, you want to make sure that that's taken care of outside of, you know, after you've gone and all that sort of stuff. So make sure you've got a will, make sure you've got a power of attorney, make sure you've got jury and guardianship, make sure if you're, you know, inclined to have a prenup that you've got a good solid one out there. you know, it's important to have all those things in place. So if you need help, I do have a law firm, Zenith Legal, head up by Steve Sidorowski over there. If you want to be put in contact, send us an email, and I can put you in contact and ask Stephen about, you know, those sorts of things. You need a will. Everybody that owns a property, even if you don't own a property, you've got kids or whatever, you should have a will. If you don't have a will, it is very, very risky. Go and get yourself a will. So please do it. It's like less than $1,000 to get it all done. Managing risk from getting screwed over. There's so many times where I've gone to shake someone's hand, and then I realise, you know, your watch is gone and your rings are gone and all that sort of stuff. Make sure of who you're shaking hands with. Be careful of who you're doing business with, who you're getting involved with, where you're getting your advice from. If you have clarity, as I was saying at the start, you've got good planning, you've got good strategy, you've got good, you know, systems and processes, you will be more inclined to stay in your lane and have clarity and direction of where you're going and not swerving off and hitting oncoming traffic. You're going to make sure that you've got a good team, you've got a good lawyer from acquiring assets as well, good insurances in place, good property manager, good diversification, as Chris asked beforehand about hobby investing, hobby-based investing. You want to make sure that you've got diversification for liquidity. Luke asked me a silly question that was funny, and it's not so silly actually. Are the koi fish a hobby investment for you? I've always actually had a goal of having fish farms. So after my motel stint, I've got a goal of getting 100 motels by 2025 or 2026, end of 2025, which I'm well on track for. But after I build out the hotel arm of it, I want to get into farming and agriculture and all that sort of stuff. And having fish farms is one of the things that always interested me. So yeah, in a kind of way, if things got really tough, I could go and sell koi fish that I bought for like $2, little ones, and I breed them in big dams, and yeah, go and have some cash flow from that. Or if worse gets to worse, I can chop them up and eat them if I really wanted to. So I don't know what a koi fish would really taste like to eat, but I do actually also have dams of perch and other sorts of animals. But have diversification, whether it be in liquid funds, whether it be cryptocurrencies, whether it be gold and silver, whether it do be in your shares, whatever. You want to have diversification out there. Most importantly, you want to make sure that you've got solid cash flow. Like my number plate of my car is cash flow. Cash flow is really, really important. So yeah. And finally, making sure that, you know, all of the moves that you make are in line with your goals. If you have clarity with your goals, make sure that you yeah, have clarity and taking the moves in line with that. So a little water, and I'll try and wrap this up in 10 minutes, guys. Inflation. There is a massive risk. I think I'm the only person that has talked about this for the last 4 years. This is becoming a very starting to be talked about topic out there. So I will touch on it just briefly. A lot of people don't understand the ramifications of inflation. We're starting to see that with the cost of everything rising. If you do not have enough assets, you'll be inadequately placed for this time that we're going through. So you want to make sure that it doesn't matter if it is your trading cards, doesn't matter if it's your koi fish, doesn't matter if it's an old car, right? An old car, doesn't matter what it is at least worth $3,000 now, because that's the cost of the metal that's inside of that car for the engine block. If you strip that car back and scrap the metal, you would have more than $3,000, probably more than $4,000 Aussie. So one of the things that I've had as a favorite pastime is smashing up cars and playing real life dodgem cars when I pick them up for $200. So I live on farms, and yeah, I've played real life dodgem cars with my mates, have, you know, a bit of banter, running cars into each other, doing donuts and all that sort of stuff. I sell the cars for more than what I paid for them in their working state. So yeah, doesn't matter what you are buying at the moment, everything is going up in value, whether it be food, whether it be linen for beds. Like I'm buying linen at the moment for lots of beds for motels, TVs, everything is rising in value, your income is not rising enough to pay for that. So the risk of inflation is real, and that is why I've always talked about owning as much stuff you can get your hands onto. All the people that are most hurt and burdened in the world, you go to your old aunt or granny or whatever that witnessed what happened during the Great Depression back in the 1930s, going back nearly 100 years ago, and they have still scars of how they lived their life, and they've gone throughout their whole life, you know, trying to have stuff that they can utilize or barter and trade or work with. So we're going into an era of high inflation. We're seeing it all around us. You know, you can sit there and try to be a consumer and consume everything, or you could be there trying to retain and hold on to assets that are going to, you know, help you get forward. So the larger the asset pool, the larger the position to be inflated. If you have zero, it's going to get inflated to zero. If you have $1, it could get inflated to $2. Well, your dollar wouldn't get inflated to anything, but if you had $1 worth of something, if you had a pen, I buy this pen for $2. Actually, come to think about it, I've never bought these pens, right? I don't know if I'm fucking on another planet or not, but I bought some whiteboards from home the other day. I was drawing some shit on them in my room. I had a mate come over and, you know, wanted to do some whiteboard sessions. And I went to buy these. There's like 6 of them for like 25 bucks or something. Like, not this one, I don't know what this one's worth, but they're like the other brand ones. And you know, if you just had this one texter and this goes up from $2 to $5 for a texter, then you don't have to buy that for $5 because you don't have the $5 to buy it, because inflation is eating everything away in the value of the dollar. So having as many options during high levels of inflation is very, very important. I love property because it has a debt that becomes lower and lower and lower and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to pay off. Plus I have the asset that's rising and rising and rising, but also I have the cash flow that's rising and rising and rising as well. So you have both ends of it which are rising. So you need to ask yourself, if you were to see hyperinflation today or massive levels of inflation, would you want to see zero double to zero? Or would you want to see 500 grand double to $1 million? Or would you want to see $2 million double to 4 million? Or would you want to see 5 million double to 10 million? I want to see $1 billion double to 2 billion, right? Yeah, so with inflation, the levels that we're starting to see, we're very early days of inflation. We're going to see massive levels of inflation. I did a video on hyperinflation last year. It was probably one of the most watched and liked videos that I'd ever done. That's on YouTube. Just type in, I don't know, maybe Nathan Birch, B.Invested inflation. It's me with a whiteboard, t-shirt, you know, drawing some stuff. Everybody is getting poorer. People were richer in 2019 than what they are in 2021. Even though my properties have gone up so much, I could have bought more back in 2019. I could have bought access to a lot more. I could have bought for 100 grand, I could have bought 50 Bitcoin. For 100 grand a day, I can buy 1.5 Bitcoin. For $1,000, I could have bought 1,000 hamburgers at Macca's. Now I can buy 400 hamburgers at Macca's. The dollar has bought me less. So are you invested into dollars, or are you invested into physical assets? Obviously, perishables, you can't take a hamburger and keep it for 10 years, so you need other items that you could get that will get inflated away. You can minimize your risk from inflation and then go and sell those items off or trade those items off for what you require at the other side. So there's an importance of having a well-diversified portfolio, as I was saying beforehand, mixed in liquid and illiquid assets, which you can navigate throughout the markets. Just finally, just remember that the cash flow will get inflated as well as the capital value. So Luke asked, is deflation or stagflation a risk at all or nothing to be concerned about? They are risks. We've seen deflation probably the last 4 years prior to about 2019. From about 2016 to 2019, we saw deflation. From 2019 to now, we've seen inflation. Specifically in the last year, we can see how high it's going up. It is a risk, but the system is designed to keep being inflated. If we have a level of deflation, it is more catastrophic than inflation. And now we're at a size, if we're talking about a bubble, that bubble's getting so big that the smaller the pressure, the bigger the impact. So it's like it needs to keep getting inflated bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's an analogy that I talked about beforehand. If you had a football field and you put a drop of water in that football field, you wouldn't even notice it. And if you doubled that drop every 30 seconds, you'd have one drop in now, you'd have 2 drops in 30 seconds, in another 30 seconds you'd have 4, and it would just keep doubling. Within an hour, right, you wouldn't even notice in, say, 55 minutes that the water has even, you just see a little splash. Maybe up the top of the stage, you see like a bit of a splash because they start becoming pool size, and then 2 pools, and then 4 pools, and 6 pools, and 8 pools, 10 pools. The size of it keeps compounding, and to a point in the last couple of minutes in that hour, you would see the stage fill up in a quarter, then it would fill up in a half, and the stage would, the football arena would flood. That is the level of where inflation is heading. The impacts are starting to be seen. You didn't see the impacts for the last 50 years of this currency. On the 15th of August this year, our currency, being the dollar, celebrates its 50th year birthday. So we're at the final stages of that. How long will it keep going on for? Who knows? But deflation is something that I'd love deflation, but it's not the environment we're in at the moment. Opportunity cost risk. A lot of people don't look at the opportunity cost. If you buy something that holds you back, if there's something you don't take action on, it could hurt you in the long term. So always factor in the opportunity cost. You make this option. If you got $10 and you go and buy, let's say that's the end of the world, right? And I've got $10 left or $100. I could buy a phone or I could buy the water, right? The phone's cool because I can make a phone call. Call mum, tell her I love her. Or I could have this water. I need to have a sip of that anyway. But if I had either one of these, which one? I could be sitting on my deathbed going, yeah, I'll call someone that could give me some water. How's that water going over there for you, right? The opportunity cost. If you have options, which option do you take, and which option is going to push you through and get you further and further on down the track? I see a lot of people over the years, and this is something that's like, it's always amused me, and I hate money, right? I do not like, when I say money, I mean currency, like dollars or whatever. If you're going to sell a property, you're selling it to get dollars, right? But what are you doing with those dollars? People are like, oh, I want money, money, money. I don't want money. I want assets. I want shit that I own around me so I can have more options. So the options are your opportunities that you are either having or not. I've never heard people say, I'm so glad I sold. And I'm actually going to talk about that in a moment. About, I'm so glad I sold a property 20 years ago. People are more upset and they're like, I wish I had bought more property 20 years ago. So be very cautious of the options of what you take today, because they could have a severe impact in the future. So I see people that sell a property, they make a quick buck and they feel like, oh yeah, I've bought a property for 200 grand, I sold it for 300 grand, and then they go to buy another one, they pay 400 grand and sell it for 500 grand. It's like, well, why didn't you just keep the first one and sell it? You still got the value there. So, a lot of people will, look at what's in front of them. They'll look at a few bucks, but what are you going to do with that money? I was thinking about it the other day. So I have some goals. I've always had them of when crypto hits certain levels and stuff like that, I'm going to sell certain cryptos off. I was like, if I sell these things and go put them into property, which is what my goal is, what property am I going to buy? I don't know exactly what ones I'm going to buy, but everything's going up. There's less and less options out there for people. If you sell something, if you sold your car today, right? You bought a car 5 years ago, you can probably sell it today and get most of your money back. When has that ever occurred in the past? If you do buy that, if you do go and sell that car that you bought 5 years ago and make money on it, what are you going to buy? You can't buy anything else because everything else has gone up. So the opportunity cost is amplified. So, as I said, with the selling of a property, I see more times than not people saying, out of 100 people, are probably maybe 2 saying, oh, I'm glad I sold a property. Most people say, I wish I had bought more properties rather than, you know, I'm so happy I sold a property 20 years ago. That goes back to inflation. But also the other aspect of selling risk is if you're selling a property, you know, are you getting the highest price for that property? Are you getting the massive, like the most amount of outcome for that asset? So you want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence. You're not selling out. Like there's markets where people have been like, oh, I can get out, I get my money. You wanted 200 grand for your property 10 years ago, right? This is 2021, right? You should be getting 400. The market's about to take off. Why would you sell at the start of the market? Why wouldn't you wait for the market cycle to take off before selling it? Is it the right time to sell? So people sell too early. They don't sell for enough. They sell with an agent that doesn't get them the highest price. They go for a cheap listing agent, which will charge you a 1% commission, but not get you the high price. I'd rather pay 3% commission or 4% commission and get an extra 50 grand because I want the net figure in my pocket. So, but I prefer not to sell anything. So that's my view. Last couple of slides, managing risk from your emotions and making the wrong decisions. I'm just saying that emotions don't pay the bills, opinions don't pay the bills. So people's opinions, people's emotions don't pay my bills. None of it bothers me. Facts is what's important. When I'm making a decision, I want to keep my emotion to the side. So that's something that I think has been a continuous sort of part of the dialogue tonight, is making sure that the emotions are what get you killed. Make logical decisions. No successful business is run on emotions. It's systemized, it's got processes, and it's got a good governance there. As an investor, as a successful family unit or whatever you've got that you're working with at home, you want to make sure that you've got good processes, systems, procedures, and governance around that. And that's something that I've been very big on all over these years. I don't talk about it enough, but systems, processes, and procedures is very, very important. Yeah, so how to sort of plan for the future when there's like a lot of things that come into play. Make sure that you've got a plan in place and then have a backup plan. So have a plan A, B, and C, and then have a plan B for plan A and a plan C for plan A, and so on and so forth. Make sure you've got backups, so many backups. The more options you've got, the less risk that you've got around. If you have this one pen and I have one buyer over here that wants to buy that pen, then there's a lot of risk. If there's 100 people, let's call it the jug, right, that want to buy this pen, well then there's a bigger market to buy this pen, so the risk is minimized. If one person doesn't buy it, there's still 99 people that do want to buy it. So as an investor, you want to make sure that you're minimizing your risk by having more and more options at any one point in time. Having a clear plan, having a strategy is very, very important. Make sure you've got a good plan and you know exactly what you're trying to do and how to get there. And making sure that you've got the right team in order to get the right advice is very, very important. So if you don't have a good team, you don't have good advisors, you don't have good accountants and all that sort of stuff, you could hurt yourself along the way. I have got a lot of questions. We've answered a lot of questions before as well. So yeah, I'm gonna just say to everybody tonight, thanks for having me as a part of your viewing. I've got to go, I'm hungry, I'm really drained, but I just want to say thanks a lot for watching. Thanks for your patience. If you do have an idea, you do have a concept, you do want to do something, reach out to my team. If you haven't spoken to us beforehand, have a free discovery session, speak to my team, send an email over, get the conversation happening. If you do have a super fund that you do want to get more information about how to protect that, send an email over to my team, say super fund. If you do have a property and you don't know about the financing, reach out to my team, see what we can do with the financing. If you are thinking of building a portfolio or whatever, reach out to my team. If you do have a property and I am not managing it, I would love to manage all of your properties. Send me an email, payrise@blinkproperty.com.au. I will get Shane to be in contact shortly to see how we can help you increase your cash flow on that front. If there's anything I've missed, feel free to reach out. You know how to get to us. Email address here, 1300 367 925. Kylie asked a question. map sessions with you. What is the wait time, please? I have two forms of map sessions that I do. I actually do all the map sessions myself, so I help people with building strategy and getting clarity around where they're trying to head to. There's a standard $495 map session, which is an hour consultation with myself, which I'm not too sure of the wait time. I think it's a few weeks in order to get into the map session. It could be about 4 weeks or so of a wait to get on that. Or if you wanted to come on board to the buyer's agency, we can bypass the map session. You have the map session as a part of that, which is $1,290, and then it fast tracks it to maybe like a week or so. There's a couple of those bookings each week where I have with investors, but all of the guidance from that side of things comes from myself to my investors to help them reach their goals, to minimize risk, and to get to where they want to be. So if there's any way that can help you, feel free to reach out. And thanks a lot for watching. Stay safe and keep being awesome. Bye for now.